Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 221. Today, I'm talking again with my good friend Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT. We are talking about managing your kids' intensity and sensory needs during the holidays. If you are listening to this when this episode airs, it is the day before Thanksgiving, and we are entering the holiday season, which, as we know as parents of neurodivergent kids, that can be quite charged when it comes to intensity and emotions and sensory challenges and all the ups and downs that go along with neurodivergencies. So we are talking about some different strategies to help navigate the holiday season with our kiddos. I know you're going to like this episode, so stay tuned. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out to our sponsors for today's episode, CTC Math and Reading Eggs. We appreciate you both so much and all of the support that you give to help us continue to bring podcasts like this and information to people who need it, who are out there homeschooling. They're quirky, outside-the-box thinkers. So check them out at ctcmath.com and readingeggs.com and let them know how much you appreciate their support as well. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Pop in those earbuds, go for a walk, tackle the laundry, whatever it is you need to do. This is going to be a good one. Hello. I am so glad you're back, Sarah. We've got Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT back. Say hello and tell everybody who you are for those who have not heard any of your previous episodes.
All right. Well, welcome back to myself and to all of you listening, right? Thank you. I love to be here. Like you said, my name is Sarah Collins. I'm an occupational therapist and a fellow homeschool mom. We've been homeschooling here in our own house since 2017. Now, all the way up to high school. We were just chatting about high school before we started recording. So we might have to hit that one up here later on. Yep. It's a whole new ballgame. Good stuff, but a whole new ballgame. So when I'm giving these conversations or when we're chatting about this, now I'm coming from the perspective of the fellow homeschool mom, also occupational therapist, and have my very own sensory kiddo. So a lot of this that we're going to be talking about, yes, it is using my OT brain, but also things that have worked within our own home and from some struggles that we've had to go through as a family and, work around and figure out what is going to make the holidays really successful for all of us.
Yeah, this is going to be a good episode. I've talked in the past about intensity during the holidays and specifically kind of through the framework of gifted and twice exceptional. And this is going to be able to take that conversation to another level. And just in case you're like worried about, okay, where does my kid fit? You don't have to. We will link in the show notes for this episode over at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. Links to past episodes where Sarah was on. So she discusses in several of those episodes the different senses, including the 5 we know and the other 3 that we don't know as well, and kind of what that looks like and what you can do just in general related to sensory input and sensory needs. And then we'll also link to the episode and there's another post that I've written about intensity and intense kids during the holidays. So you have extra resources that you can dive into about this topic. But it's a tricky one, and we have to have a different mentality when we're parenting outside the box, unusual, atypical, challenging children. Not because they're bad, not because they're wrong, not because they're broken, but because they process the world in a different way. And the holidays can be overwhelming for neurotypical people.
Yes.
So they are definitely overwhelming for atypical kids and adults, but we're going to talk specifically about kids here. So why don't you kind of kick us off here, Sarah, and tell us some of the things maybe that we might experience?
Yeah, so I'm going to start off first with a little story about my main man. So Caleb is now 12. And again, I always ask him before I do any of these conversations where I'm going to bring up any part of his story. So I know what I can and what I can't say, but because it is his story, right? But he also recognizes how he's not alone. And that's because we've been through this for many, many years that we've been talking about this, that every brain is unique, right? But there are, obviously, when we talk about neurotypical, and we've got a bell curve and whatever, and then we've got our outside of the box kiddos after that. But they're not only themselves, like it's not just him that struggles sensory wise, so we have talked about that quite frequently, and he's happy to and willing to share his story, knowing that other kids or parents might hear it and feel okay. So here we go. It was right after we started homeschooling, and we went to this plantation. We live right outside of Philadelphia. So there's so much history here that we pretty much could do all of American history just living right here. You feel it, right? You see it, you taste it, you can smell it. Like we've got it all. We can live history. And so we were at this plantation, and as we were there, it was a homeschool day, and they invited like one kiddo up front to put on the gear, right? Or the outfit. I don't know what you call it, period wear, whatever. So they invited him to put it on, and he did, and he was really excited. But then after he had it on and it felt weird and it smelled different, and he saw these people were looking at him, and he's 6 years old, and what he did is turn around and tackle the kid right next to him immediately. And then that kid starts getting upset, rightfully so. He was just tackled by someone he had no idea. That mom is like screaming. The lady whose clothes he was wearing were all upset because what if he ripped the garb, the get up, right? And so I'm standing in the middle like, okay, trying to keep myself calm, because we all know if mama gets more riled up than everybody else is at one time. And so the story just came back to the forefront of my mind the other day, because we were looking through our like yearbooks. I make a yearbook every year. And he said he remembers it now, but he didn't remember any of that stuff that happened after. He remembered wearing those clothes because sensory wise, like our memories are often linked to what we see, touch, feel, especially smell, oddly enough, but because of the location in the brain it is. So the reason I wanted to bring that one up is because it was just a unique situation that had happened one time during the year. And that is often like what the holidays are, especially if we're thinking even about Halloween. We're asking our kids to go in a different place. We're asking them to dress up and wear different clothes. Christmas sweaters, anyone? We're asking them to have different smells. We're asking them to be around a whole lot of people that they may not know or that they see 1 or 2 times a year. The lighting is often different, so we are taking in so much more through our bodies, and our brain has to organize that and to make us feel comfortable and not either, overwhelmed or underwhelmed, but we have to be able to manage it and organize it. And that is really, really hard for a lot of kids. So if we can prevent them from having to tackle. Now, let me also back up. Like, why do you think he tackled another kid? Because that seems like an odd thing to do. But what he was doing, and he couldn't say that then, obviously, but now we can talk about it because we know his body so well, and we've been working on this for years and years and years. That proprioception, or heavy work, is what helps to calm the nervous system and organize it. So think about how much input he got into his joints right away when he dove on top of another kid. Like he felt it through his, I remember because I remember that moment. He felt it through his shoulders. He felt it through his hips. He felt it through his core, like how much information that gave his body. So then once he stood up, he kind of felt more of himself. He felt more right in his own skin. So those moments, especially when we're seeing meltdowns and we're seeing our kids start crashing into things around us or hiding under pillows and wanting to be wrapped up really tightly. And, there are kids who do that by cuddling and sitting really close. And those are the kids that were like, oh, look, grandma's so excited. Or, our kids who are, climbing on Uncle Jim and going spinning around in like the legs of, Aunt Susie. And those are the kids where it's not quite as socially acceptable, but they're both meeting the same needs. So we have to teach them how to meet those needs in a way that is appropriate for the environment. And we need to advocate for them so that they're also not feeling that shame of, oh, great, I got in trouble again. And, Aunt Josie's table got broken. We don't want that. So we want to make it so that they feel comfortable in their environment and can organize their bodies.
Yeah. And that's so tricky because, again, like you said, in that example, they're out of their kind of normal space. And so it's just a more impulsive act
Yeah.
because they don't have their normal tools with them. And it's not like you can predict all those different
Right.
things. And so when it comes to the holidays, we're dealing with, like you said, family gatherings with people that you only see, once in a while. And we're dealing with different kinds of foods because everybody brings a potluck and there's all this stuff out there. And they're picking at things that you don't normally feed them, or they're avoiding things because it's all different textures. They don't know what to expect. And then they're getting, if they're avoiding it, they're getting hungry. And that leads to all sorts of other troubles. And
That we're hangry.
right. And so just navigating all of that needs some planning. I have one story that I want to jump in here too, because it kind of goes along with that, with like you were saying, you've got your son in that particular instance exhibited very much seeking behaviors, right? Whereas one of my kids is an avoider, especially when she gets overwhelmed, she just kind of shrinks into herself and is like that, oftentimes cuddling with someone that she knows and can trust. In fact, we used to have to tell her not to put her hand down people's shirts because the skin to skin was very comforting for her. And it was like, can't do that when we're out in other places. But if you want to put your hand like on my belly, that's okay, or rub my arm. But I remember being in a Dillard's with her at Christmas time. She and I were Christmas shopping and we ran into my aunt. And she knew my aunt. She'd seen my aunt, but she mostly sees my aunt at family birthday parties or Thanksgiving or Christmas. And so that was maybe 5 times a year. And it was always at either grandma's house or great grandma's house, or occasionally at aunt's house. It was never in a store.
In a store, right.
And so she hid behind my legs, and my aunt was offended and taken aback because here she was acting like she didn't know her, but she was just so overwhelmed. She's already overwhelmed because we're shopping, right?
Yes.
There's all these lights and sounds and all the stimulation, right? With all of the holiday displays in the mall. And then there's somebody who's not usually seen outside of 3 separate places talking to her like they just saw each other yesterday. And so that can be another type of like exhibition of how this, or that's not the right word, but manifestation of how these behaviors come. And so what are some things we can do as parents to set us up and set our kids up for success as we enter this holiday season? Because we're recording this in the fall, but this is airing. If you're listening to this on the day that it airs, it's right before Thanksgiving. So you are heading into the holiday season. If you're listening to this a year from now, it's totally applicable. Get ready for the next holiday season. But what do we do right now when we have to go to Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow and Christmas dinner, or if we celebrate other holidays? There's all manner of different gatherings during this time.
Yeah. So if you're going to Thanksgiving tomorrow, these first 2 are going to be a little bit harder, but I am going to kind of go through some things that I feel like will be really helpful. Even if you're like, okay, so tomorrow I can take like steps 3 and 4, right? And make it happen then. But for Christmas, I'm going to do some of these other things beforehand to prepare. So my first one is to just be observing of your child. We've talked about this a lot. Be a student of your student. We need to know, like, how do they feel with different tastes? And this stuff, but if you sit down and you write down and you look at taste, you look at smell, you look at touch, you look at movement, write down what makes them more energetic or more what we would eventually get to like leading towards a meltdown, and what like makes them really calm down. Write down those things. Even if tomorrow you're going to Thanksgiving, sit down tonight so that you and write down from your memory, wow, when we smell this, what happens to my child? That type of thing, so that you can and think about it in each type of sense. So even if we're saying like, oh, we look outside and we're looking out the window and, it helps to calm my child down, or we look at really busy art, or we look at screens and it ramps them up. These are things you most likely know because of you've been around your children every day, right? So that's the first, is observe. The second is communicate. And so And I say this for two reasons. One, because in the moment, we want to have a communication system down so that it's not as if your child needs to use all of these words to help you know what they're feeling. Because if a child is overwhelmed or underwhelmed, like, so really just groggy and not really, or avoidant, kind of what you were saying, coming up with the words of how they feel is a lot harder. So if you have a communication system, so the zones of regulation, which we've talked about in a past episode, or the alert program, which we've talked about in a past episode, those are great so that you can just say something like, are you in the yellow zone? Or does your engine feel like a Jaguar? You've got just those quick things that a child could even nod or communicate, or shake their head no, or whatever, to let you know how they're feeling without, well, mom, right now, blah, blah, blah. When I smelled this, it made me alert. That's too much. But we want to be able to communicate so we can preempt. Also, because that can help them to advocate for themselves. So the same son, I do remember one day, now this was not a holiday. No, it was at a holiday, actually. It was at Thanksgiving. And one of my uncles said, and in the most loving way, but he was like, yeah, Caleb, he never sits still, right? He's always out moving around all the time. And it was such a loving way to do it. But we've been really working hard not to say you can't do something, not to say you can't sit still, but instead be like, he learns better when he moves. And I remember my son turning to him and he's like, oh, I could sit still, but I learn better when I move. Yes. Like, listen to that advocacy. And then he's not feeling any type of shame in that moment. He's not feeling like, oh, I don't fit in here, or I can't like sit at Thanksgiving dinner and that's going to be really hard. But instead he's like, I learn better, or I, feel better when I'm moving. That translates for forever, guys. You can have that conversation, in a meeting when you're an adult. Listen, you might see me in the back shaking my leg. I learn better when I move, or I listen better when I'm moving. Great. That's excellent. So if we start these words now when they're younger, as they're moving forward through all their different life events, then they can use those same things and feel comfortable. We're giving them that practice forever. So observe, communicate, prepare as much as possible. So Carol Gray came up with the initial social stories. And there are some specific things that a social story would usually have, like it's written in a first person. So meaning like Caleb is going to grandma's house or whatever. But there are some apps that can help you to come up with them. We used to do them just on PowerPoint presentations where I would say, and then I would print it out. So like he had his own book, like Caleb is going to grandma's for Thanksgiving dinner. And the next page would be like, who all is going to be there? Then what we might eat, so that we covered all the senses, basically, like what you would see, what you would touch, what you would smell. Because most of those things you can kind of predict because you've been to these events a lot or frequently. And we could do that even on days like Christmas Day here at home, or, if there was going to be a tin whistle concert for homeschooling or whatever it is, where we would just kind of lay out like, these are the things that we know. And the reason I'm saying that is because predictability can lead to more flexibility. So if they know, yes, this is what I can predict is going to happen, and can kind of gauge their bodies around that because they already know, then if something else happens, they have some more space, to process through that. They have some more intellectual capacity in that moment, if you will. So the one kind of struggle, and this is, again, you will know, your child best. If you lay all this out and then something is different and your child is very rigid in their thinking, and then it isn't that way, that is something else they have to. So knowing your child, like how specific do you need to be within these stories or this preparation? Is it something you can just do auditorily, or does your child really need something visually to see, to know? Some kiddos who need like a visual schedule at home so they can predict, you might be able to do something very similar going like, we are probably going to it's Christmas. We're going to open our presents in the morning, and then we eat lunch here, and then we drive in the car, and then we see grandma. And, so it could just be like a sequential order too. But again, that is based on whatever works for your family and your child. The next thing I would say is either add or subtract sensory experiences as needed. So for Caleb, we've talked about he needs to move, but what his movement is. So trying to break it down a little bit, because a lot of these stories I've already shared on here, so I don't want to have to repeat them a lot, but I also don't want you to, if this is the first time you're listening, be like, what on earth is she talking about? So because he was born premature, and so his eyes were not working the way that yours and mine, it was the eye muscles that were really weak. And auditorily, he did not hear well at the beginning because of the fluid in his ears, the tubes, things like that. So he was making sense of his world through movement, not through visual and auditory. They couldn't be trusted in a way. So he learned everything through touch and through movement. So, but what that would do is, because he was having so much movement, that's mostly your vestibular system, he needed even more proprioception because to organize, because the vestibular system is the most alerting system. That's why, if you ever see kids who are spinning around, or why when you go on a roller coaster, why you get off and you're like, maybe your belly hurts, or you're like, whoa, that's the most alerting. Proprioception, which is your body's relationship to itself. So it's how you're pushing, you're pulling, you're lifting things, all of that. That gives you more information about where you are in relationship to yourself. So it is more organizing for your neurological system. So because of that, because he would be moving and moving and moving, then he would need proprioception so he didn't get overwhelmed. Is that clear enough? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Perfect. So I actually forgot where I was going with that.
We were in prepare and talking about what kinds of things.
Right. So we would have to talk about, if your body feels like you need to move, where do you go? We would need to have that, like, this is what, we're not going to ask you to suppress it, because then you don't feel good and you don't feel comfortable where you are. But where can you go? It is not a good idea to be spinning or crawling on the floor or jumping in the room where, Granny J and Gramps have their glass table. That's just not a good idea. So what can we do instead? We can walk out the front door. And I always had to make myself available for that situation. Right. Like, okay, I will take you for a walk. You tell me you're in the yellow zone. Let's roll. It's because I do want it to be comfortable for everyone.
Hey there. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit more about CTC Math. We've been using it for a few years now. And I had a conversation with my daughter the other day. She came to me and she said, Mom, I was going to the next lesson in my math program. And she said, I looked at it and it's something that I already know how to do. Do you want me to go through and just keep doing it? That seems kind of boring. And so we glanced through the different lessons that were in the unit, and she did. She could tell me exactly what she knew and proved that she knew all of the stuff that was coming up over the next 10 lessons. So I said, okay, skip it. You don't need to do something that you already know how to do, and you just proved to me that you know how to do it. That's just one of the reasons I love CTC Math. I've said before that they are sponsors of this podcast, and I'm so grateful to their sponsorship, but I'm also a customer. I pay for my subscription every year, and I have for the last several years. We are strong supporters of CTC Math. We love them. We appreciate them for so many reasons, and that is just one. And I'm not the only one. I've gotten a couple emails recently. This one's from Jamie. Jamie said, at your recommendation, we switched over to CTC Math last month. We have used another curriculum for several years, but it just wasn't meeting our needs anymore. Now we've settled into a good rhythm. The kids are loving it, and I love that we are able to adapt it for each of their individual needs. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Jamie, I love that, and I was so excited to hear it because it just goes to show I'm not the only one who has had that experience from CTC, being able to adjust on the fly as our kids are learning. I love, love, love that. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, go to ctcmath.com. You will not be sorry. Hey there. Okay, so do you want to make learning to read fun for your kiddos? Check out Reading Eggs. We have used Reading Eggs off and on throughout the years, and all of my kids have loved it. It's a multi-award winning online reading curriculum for ages 2 to 13. It covers phonics, sight words, comprehension, and so much more. The cool thing is there's so much scientific research that backs it up, and it's trusted by over 20 million users. When you go to their website, you can sign up for a free 30-day trial and get instant access to hundreds of lessons, worksheets, ebooks, and reports on what your kiddos are doing online. It's kid-safe certified, ad-free, and full of all sorts of gamification to give your kiddos exciting rewards, animations, music, all sorts of fun things to motivate your kiddo to learn. Check it out at readingeggs.com/RLL. That's readingeggs.com/RLL. You won't be sorry, and your kids will love you for it. Yeah, I want to add to that before you go on to anything else, because that prep is important, and it's something that that we forget about and we feel badly about as parents, right? I remember I was such a good parent before I had kids, and I don't know about you, Sarah, but I bet you were too. Yeah, my kids, like before I actually had them, they were like lined up. They looked good. They listened.
Oh, everyone had matching clothes. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. Their hair was like combed. But I was not going to be a parent who had devices or things that distracted them from the people they were around. But then I had atypical children. My kids are neurodivergent. And so it is not in my reality to be able to go somewhere and not have some things that in a pinch can save us. That includes devices for us. And so I learned early on with my oldest that not only did I have to prep him through things like social stories and conversations about what he may or may not expect during that time, but I also had to have a bag, right? I had to have a diaper bag long after my kids were out of diapers that included a Kindle Fire with some apps that were appropriate, headphones, some snacks, and some like more robust snacks than just snacky snacks in case there was no food that they would eat. Juice boxes that were appropriate, because sometimes the drinks were just not okay for my specific kids, water bottles, and then comfort items too. And we had signals like for when we needed to leave and go for a walk, or when they needed to unplug by plugging in. Our rule always was, though, like Sarah said, we are not able to make other people uncomfortable. Everybody deserves to feel comfortable. So we will remove ourselves and go for a walk, or we will go into another room, or we will do something that doesn't impact the enjoyment of the other people at the gathering, nor is it rude to the people who are hosting. So we would always kind of scout out, and oftentimes at family gatherings in particular, it was the room where everybody's coats were thrown, right? Our bag was stashed there. And if my oldest or my first or my third, really, one of the two of them needed to put their headphones on and go play an app for a while or watch a video, because one of them really was like into some videos that were calming for her, then they could. They need to touch base with me. I would walk with them into the bedroom, get them settled, and then let them know that everything had to be put back in the bag before they came out. And we closed the door so they weren't distracting. They didn't make the other kids feel badly that they couldn't be on their devices or whatever. But sometimes you have to do things you don't expect to ever have to do, and things you swore you wouldn't do as a parent. That includes leaving too. And I think this is something we forget. Like, our job is to be the parent our kids need in whatever moment that is. And so often, especially when our children were young, Brian and I drove separately to parties and family gatherings. And I left hours earlier than he did with one or three or all four of the kids, so that we would have needs met wherever they were. So that preparation goes, it's the pre before you leave, but it's also preparing for while you're there and then following through with that.
We used to pack bubbles all the time, because you could walk out, even if it's cold, Christmas time, whatever, you can blow bubbles outside for a few minutes. And sometimes when it's cold and you're blowing bubbles, it's pretty cool to watch, watch like what happens to your breath. And then we're talking about that. And that really brings some mindfulness into wait, what happens when I'm breathing this way? It encourages you to breathe in through your nose and, then out through your mouth, and can help to calm the nervous system. One of the things that you were saying, Colleen, was, about yourself needing to be available for your children, which brings me to, yes, we are focused in this episode on kids, but we have to make sure that ourselves as parents are regulated during that time too. So what is it that you need to do? I remember one time leaving, and I told my husband, I was like, I feel like my skin is about to pop off because it was just people that I love, so excited to see people that I love. But me having to navigate what was going to work for my child at that point. And that was what I think when we were in the height of like Caleb really beginning to understand his body. And again, he is 12 now and he is fantastic. And I feel like I could take him anywhere. But when he was 6 and 7 and 8, it was not that way. And as a teeny tiny one also wasn't, but it's more socially acceptable when you're teeny and tiny and people are expecting 2 and 3-year-olds to struggle, right? Or to have a heart and they're, oh, it's so cute. Or that's a meltdown, or he's crying. Oh, it's okay. He'll get over it. It's different when they're older. And so those years were the hardest for me. And I do remember leaving at one point and like, okay, I don't think we're ever going to go back to another Christmas dinner. And guys, that is okay. Yeah. It is okay to say, we do Christmas at home because it's the best for my family, right? For us to be able to advocate for ourselves and for our children. I also would always make sure that before we left in the morning, I would go for my own walk. We now still, Caleb and I, go for a hike every Thanksgiving morning. It's a tradition that came out of us needing to prepare his body and his mind. And guys, that tradition for me is so much more important. I actually was joking with him last year. I'm like, what do you think your wife's going to do when we're doing this, when you're like 25 and 26? Or I don't know, whatever, however old you are when you get married. He's like, oh, Mom, that's so funny. Yeah, just kidding. When I show up at your house ready for my hike Thanksgiving morning. But that is something to get outside, to just really prepare our minds and our bodies for what the day might look like. And guys, the All Trails app, that goes for everywhere in the world. So you could find a trail, or you can find something, just walking around wherever you are. Another would be like a workout or something, whatever that you use for your body to make sure that you are organized sensory wise, like you have had that heavy work to prepare so that you are, heading into this situation, because you're more on your toes, especially when your kids are in that like middle gap, the past toddlerhood. But this is an issue. We're still struggling sensory wise, or we're still really in different environments. We need some space and we need to feel good.
Yeah. And I don't think that can be understated, that piece about, sometimes you don't go to the family gatherings. And so it's something that I want to reiterate it here, because I don't think I've talked about it for years and years and years, actually. So I've been doing this a while. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for parents to know, I get asked the question a lot. What do I do when, my family wants to have these things? I can't say no. Well, you actually can.
You can.
It's hard. We don't go anywhere on Christmas Day. We don't go anywhere on Thanksgiving Day. And we haven't since Trevor was about 4.5, 5, because like you, that was when it got really hard and it was no longer acceptable to others. The judgments were difficult, and we took a lot of backlash for that.
Yeah.
We took a lot of hits within our family, and we had to stand our ground, and we didn't over explain. We just said, this is what's best for our family right now. If we can come in the future, we can. But honestly, one of my kids, my youngest, he's going to be 11 in a couple months. He said to me, you know what I like best out of everything, any meal that I ever have and any day that we ever have? I'm like, what? He's like, I love Christmas breakfast. I'm like, really? And Christmas breakfast is not anything special. It's this sausage egg casserole that takes.
Oh, we do the same Christmas breakfast.
And we do a French toast casserole. So we do French toast with blueberries.
We do that in coffee cake.
And we do the breakfast. I make them the night before. I put them in the oven while we're opening presents, so it's ready when we're done. And I said to him, well, because those are easy to make. I just never
Yeah.
make them outside of Christmas.
Yeah.
And I
We
said,
don't either.
would you like me to make those more often? He said, no, those are
No.
Christmas.
Yep.
And
Christmas
so he said, like, I asked him, I'm like, are you going to come back and like eat that? He's like,
day.
yes, I'm always going to come on Christmas morning for breakfast. And so it's that like your walks was something that was born out of, it was kind of for us, it was a way to make it special to stay
Yep.
home.
Mm-hmm.
And because my older two in particular kind of remembered some family gatherings because we
Right.
go periodically and try it again and then realize, okay, yeah, it's really not, we really like
Right.
our lazy,
Yeah.
relaxed kind of days. We go out for Christmas Eve. My husband's family always does the Saturday before Christmas. So it was my family that was so focused on the day of
Yeah.
that they couldn't distance themselves between it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was so hard because that day's already full of excitement and overwhelm. And like you said, you've got all of the sensory input. And my extended family, certain members were so entrenched in the idea that that was their holiday or this was at their place that we
Yes.
could
It's kind of
never,
interesting how those routines
right.
happen.
There
Yes.
was
Yeah.
not going to be a rotation. It was never going to come to us.
Yep.
And my kids just needed to be home.
Yep.
So we did. And yes, you will get the backlash
Yep.
that you're afraid of getting. But
Mm-hmm.
you have to remember that your responsibilities to your kids. And there are ways to build new memories and new routines and new rituals around the holiday that will serve you longer. And then this is something that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do, but I keep reminding myself to be accepting when my kids
I
get to that
know.
point, right? Because
Like my hike when I'm talking about this with
yeah,
Caleb now.
they may not want to come over.
Might not
Their
be a
wife
good
or
idea.
their husband may not want to come over and have French toast, bacon, sausage, egg bake, and that's okay. We have to do what's right for our families,
Yep.
and we have to recognize that we're never going to please everybody. So it's our responsibility to help our family, our kids get what they need when they need it, when we can support them.
Yeah. I will say my father-in-law has always been fantastic about like, oh, let's go outside, with my kids in the midst of something. Like he was never struggled with Caleb, but also he was a Division I athlete in college. And so part of me is like, because you get it, And so when I say, and I do think that there are a lot of families that really struggle, especially with expectations and stuff. But I also feel like there are times when if we let them in on little pieces of what our kids actually need, they're like, oh, I needed that too. I wish someone would have done that for me.
Yeah.
And they have that option, let's see if they will live up to it. That if we give them that piece of, you know what, this is what we're going through right now, or this is what he really needs and to feel loved. This really helps. If they know just one or two little things that they can do, they might feel empowered to do so. Yeah. So where I don't think you need to give long explanations as far as like, I know part of me as the OT, I'm like, well, his nervous system or blah, blah, blah. And I want to go into this whole long story about you want me to tell you about the vestibular system, proprioception, have a seat, guys. It'll be a great Thanksgiving meal discussion. Probably not. But I can say these are some things that if you do with Caleb, he will really feel loved and special. And a lot of times families will jump in on that. Some might feel overwhelmed, and that's okay too. Like we have to accept their boundaries as well. Because again, your role is, their most important is then as a mother, more important than it is as a daughter or a daughter-in-law or niece or nephew or whatever you are in that moment. It is the mom.
Absolutely. Okay, you said observe, communicate, prepare. Was there another one on that list, or do we get all three? Because I want to make
to regulate yourself. So that was a piece of it. And
yeah.
Then add or remove, the sensory things that you need. So we talked about, you can add some things that could be helpful. You were talking about bring your screens, bring your headphones if you need it. My daughter actually used to wear like knit hats a lot of places because you can block out noise, but it also just gives you just a little bit more of the proprioception on your head. The head is actually one of the areas that can be really extra sensitive that you don't really notice. So if you're adding some proprioception there, that can be helpful and calming. Or thinking about, could we bring in, well, first thing that came to my mind was Play-Doh, but that's probably a really bad idea.
Probably
but
not if somebody else
that you can squeeze, or like an activity that more, if there's other children there that you think that they'll be able to do, that will give some simple proprioception. So chewing gum, that's another one, because that can go in through your jaw. Drinking from a straw, like those are all things that can kind of calm and help to navigate. I always brought his own cups when we would go somewhere, just for that, because who knows what they have there. And even going up through, 8, 9, 10, I mean, I carried my water bottle with a straw in it all the time. So that's one of those like socially acceptable things that people don't really necessarily know. Oh, that's different, or what's going on there. There's like, oh, he's drinking from a different cup. Fine, no big deal. So if you can add or subtract things that are calming for your children, that can be helpful. And then, making sure that you're regulated yourself.
Okay, so any last piece of advice that you have for parents who are getting ready to go to Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow and then jumping headfirst into the holiday season and all of the things that go along with that?
So my last and most important piece of it, I'm going to say the same one that I do every time, because I think this is very underrated, and that is move. Just get up and move. That when you are getting that heavy work in the proprioception, that is the most organizing to your system. So if you can have within your, rhythm of your day, some movement time for yourself and for your children, whatever that can look like for you, make it happen within, a given holiday and regular time. And when we're looking at all these special things for, around the holiday season, I mean, goodness, making cookies, you're banging on that, on the dough, but give them the rolling pins. Or you can do some really silly things like Cosmic Kids Yoga always has like the gingerbread movement one, or something like that. And outside as much, as you can. I recognize that is not always something that someone thinks they're going to enjoy, but the natural lighting from outdoors, the natural sounds where you're able to hear, oh, look at the bird that's over, or you heard the bird on one side, you turn your head to look at it. That's all naturally calming, because it is different than the loud sounds within a house where there's so many people that are around. The sound waves are different when you're outside. So giving yourself that space to naturally calm and organize your nervous system. So move, get up and move.
Perfect. I love that. And I'm going to go do that in a minute here too.
There you go.
Sitting around a lot. Well, thank you for coming back and talking about this topic. I appreciate you and your time so much.
Thank you. I mean, I really love this. I love, hopefully my passion for all of this comes through, because it really is to make sure that our kids feel comfortable, but they have experiences that have meaning to you and things that your family has done for years, like passing that on. And I do think that's why families do want us to be coming around so much. They want to share what, mattered to them as kids and what they've done their entire lives to give our kids roots. So that is important. We just need to figure out how to make it possible for everybody.
Yep. And that might mean a different day. That might mean there's specific family members that work out. We go to a Christmas Eve every year. We don't go to a Christmas Day because that's the day that it doesn't work out. So you find what works for you, you stick with it. Still kind of involving your kids in the different things that connect them to their past and build for their future. All right. There will be lots of resources over on the show notes for this episode at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast, links to past episodes with Sarah, so you can listen more about the actual specifics about the different senses, with more ideas for helping kids out when they struggle in those areas. Other episodes and articles where I've talked about or written about intensity and things like that during the holidays. And then we'll link again to some of the things that Sarah mentioned in this episode, like the zones of regulation, the alert system, and Cosmic Kids Yoga, and a couple other things in there.
Social stories, probably.
What's that?
Social stories.
Yeah. Social Stories, Carol Gray, right? And make sure that we have all of that as well as links to homeschoolot.com, but check Sarah out and then her offerings with coupon codes over there too. So check that out, support her and her work, and let us know if you have other questions or other things that you'd like us to talk about. Over on the show notes, there is a link to the contact form, which goes to my email, as well as a link to a voicemail widget. So you can ask a question.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we can,
maybe I'll start sending you messages there.
You should. That'd be fun. And then we can talk about those different things. So we'll be back next week, same time, same place. I hope you have a great holiday if you're listening to this during Thanksgiving week. And
yes, happy holidays.
Yeah, super fun. All right, have a good one. Enjoy your kids. Bye for now. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 221. Today, I'm talking again with my good friend Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT. We are talking about managing your kids' intensity and sensory needs during the holidays. If you are listening to this when this episode airs, it is the day before Thanksgiving, and we are entering the holiday season, which, as we know, as parents of neurodivergent kids, that can be quite charged when it comes to intensity and emotions and sensory challenges and all the ups and downs that go along with neurodivergencies. So we are talking about some different strategies to help navigate the holiday season with our kiddos. I know you're going to like this episode, so stay tuned. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out to our sponsors for today's episode, CTC Math and Reading Eggs. We appreciate you both so much and all of the support that you give to help us continue to bring podcasts like this and information to people who need it, who are out there homeschooling. They're quirky, outside-the-box thinkers. So check them out at ctcmath.com and readingeggs.com and let them know how much you appreciate their support as well. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Pop in those earbuds, go for a walk, tackle the laundry, whatever it is you need to do. This is going to be a good one.